Oh, we're good. Hi, everybody. We're doing an interview today. It's Christmas Eve 2018 as Mimi Williams and Dee Dee Williams.
That would be Terry and Todd.
Yes.
Those are our real names. In case you didn't know.
I know. Okay.
So how did you guys meet?
Oh, that's an easy one. Okay, you can
You
tell
go.
that one. You can tell it. I like the way you tell it. Go ahead.
There was a Georgia Association of Educators conference in Atlanta. And Mimi's principal, or former principal, was running for president. And so she was there in his hospitality suite, greeting educators as they came in to meet Chuck Mobley. And there was also a lady who worked in the school system running for president against him. And my roommate and I went downtown to check out the hospitality suite for her candidacy. And so we went to see the competitor's hospitality suite, and there she was with this beautiful black hair and white skin. I later learned that her students called her Snow White. And as we talked a little bit, we learned that we lived just a short few hundred yards from each other
Well, I didn't know that.
in an apartment complex in Clayton County, and
Right around the corner from each other.
things just developed from there.
How old were you guys when this happened?
27,
Yeah,
26, 27.
27, I think.
You guys are the same age, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. It was just making. So yeah, I guess I'll revert to my list of questions I have here.
They may not all get
Just
answered.
pick one at random, Doris.
So how did your guys' families come to live where you are? And like take turns answering or whatever.
Well,
You talk now.
okay. My mother was from Atlanta, and my father was from a town south of Thomaston called Pratt. Well, he was born in Prattsburg, but lived in Talbotton. And they both went to the University of Georgia and met there. And that's how they got to know each other and got married after they graduated and went to live in Thomaston.
Well, my parents are from Texas,
I did not know that.
and mother grew up in the Panhandle region of Texas and started college at Texas Tech in Lubbock. And when Dad got out of World War II, he also went to school at Texas Tech. And Mom and Dad met each other there. And Dad majored in textile engineering, so he was a textile engineer, and Mother was a teacher. And when they graduated from college, Dad's first job was all the way here in Georgia. And so they packed everything up into a car and drove to Manchester, Georgia, where they lived, and I was born. Actually, I was born in Columbus. There was no hospital in Manchester.
So you were born in a hospital?
Yes, and so mother was a member of the Dr. Spock generation of child rearing, and so she was not going to have anything to do with me being born at a house. anywhere. She was going to go to a hospital. So anyway, we moved around Georgia a pretty good bit. We lived for 2 years in Manchester, and then we lived 2 years in Avondale Estates, and then and my sister came along, Judy, and then we moved to Rome for 2 more years. I started first grade there, and my brother Bruce came along, and then we moved to Columbus, and I finished first grade and second grade in Columbus, and then we moved to Albany, where I started third grade, and my last brother came along at that point. And so basically I lived in Albany, third grade through 2 years of junior college, and then went off to Georgia, University of Georgia, but anyway, so I grew up in Albany, down in southwest Georgia.
What do you say moving so much when you were little? Was that difficult at all for you? Or
I don't remember it being a problem or not a problem. It's what we did.
this is a little. Mimi, were you also born in a hospital? Or?
In Atlanta.
At
So why were you born in Atlanta if you lived in Thomaston?
Oh, well.
Same reason.
Was there no hospital in Thomaston?
Yes, there was, but for some reason, I don't know why, we always, if there was anything that had to be done, we had to go to Atlanta to do it. Whether we shopped, or if we went to the dentist, or if we went to the eye doctor, or we always had to go to Atlanta. And
How
Did
far?
everybody go to Atlanta, or was that just your family?
that was just our family.
How far away was it? Like,
It was about, and that,
Probably at least an hour and a half, close to 2 hours.
yeah. And we used to get very dressed up. We had to dress up like, just really dressed up. Women would wear their furs and their hats, and we'd wear our gloves and our best shoes and our dresses, and it was a real fancy affair.
Yeah, I remember you telling me like how you'd complain about having to go to the dentist and then you get some treat afterwards because you win.
That's right. I did not like the dentist. He was my least favorite person in the world. And I had to go fairly frequently because I ate so much candy. So my treat for being good would be to go to Woolworths, and they had a whole bunch of candy. And my favorite was the malted milk balls. And you could get a white bag and just scoop up the malted milk balls and put them in the bag. And if I was good, they would give me that every time we went to Atlanta.
Did you ever not get the candy?
Not that I can remember.
So how well behaved were you guys as kids?
How what?
How well behaved?
Oh, I was very well behaved. How about you? Now he was different.
No, I was pretty good. I mean, we all had our little mischief things, but I certainly was a pretty well behaved kid.
Can I hear about one or two of these mischievous behaviors?
No.
I know one. I'll tell you one.
Like, I want to
I
hear
shall
this.
listen.
Tell her about the incident with the yellow raincoat. Or the ice cream cone.
Remember
Ice cream. Remember, you
Oh.
took off by yourself to get ice cream.
Well, one time when I was maybe 4 years old and we lived in Avondale, my sister had just been born, and so Mother was pretty busy, and Dad would have been at work. And in Avondale, there's a very, very busy street that runs through the middle of town. And one day, Dad came home from work, and as a 4-year-old, I had crossed this very, very busy street by myself and went to the store that had ice cream. And Dad saw me there and brought me home, wondering what I was what I was doing. I don't think that's too bad.
Well, did
Especially-
you have money with you? I mean,
I was 4 years old. I didn't know what money was.
Mom, did you ever on occasion leave school in the middle of the day?
I ran away from kindergarten one day
yeah.
with my friend.
Did you have a plan?
Yes, we walked to her house.
Was there a reasoning why you?
I don't remember why we did it. I just remember thinking, this will be fun. Let's do it. And everybody was
That's a good reason.
real scared. We scared everybody.
So where did you guys like hang out as teenagers?
Piggy Park in Thomaston was a big teenage hangout. They had sold hamburgers and there were 2 locations. There was one right down from where we lived.
That's the drive-in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the newer location was built on the north side of town, but the old location is gone now. But the newer location is still there. And
But it's been there since the 1950s.
and it was in the
pretty
movie about McDonald's, about
Oh,
Ray
really?
Kroc. Yeah, that little there was a little snatch about it. They showed it.
Were you on the trip where we visited that?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
That was before we went to his house.
Alright. Oh yeah. Okay.
But we would get in our cars and ride around the square. And there would be boys standing on the square. We'd ride around and look at them.
I'm just trying to imagine. So was it all the boys on the square and then all the girls just in the car driving around? Or
Yeah.
did you guys intermingle?
Yeah, no. That's pretty much the way it worked. Yeah. Where'd you hang out?
Well, in Albany, we didn't have Piggy Park. We had the Arctic Bear.
I like that name.
Is that also a drive-in?
It was also a drive-in, yes. It had been there a long time. And even today, even though the Arctic Bear is no longer there, today they saved the neon sign. And you can rent the neon sign and have it come out to gatherings there in Albany. But we would, like they did in Thomaston, they'd ride around the square. We would ride up and down Slappy Boulevard. And go north on Slappy Boulevard and turn around somewhere and drive back south and go through the Arctic Bear and hang out there. But I spent a lot of time at the YMCA. That was probably where I hung out.
Was that when it was boys only?
No, this was this was when family YMCA's were going strong.
Okay.
And so, but I would go there Tuesdays and Thursdays, and I would teach basketball and gymnastics and volleyball and something called athletic achievement.
Didn't you like something with swimming? Because he used to talk to me about it.
Yeah, I taught swimming at the YMCA as
Yeah.
well, where all the kids had their minnow and fish and flying fish
Yeah.
and shark badges, and so we would teach those different swimming skills as well. But I preferred the gym as opposed to the swimming. And later on, a lot of that was volunteer work. But later on, I worked at the Y and did some of the same things. So that was my hangout place.
Tell us about the Young Harris leadership camp or whatever. Or am I getting something confused?
Young Harris was in the early 80s. Computers started to appear in schools, and I was always kind of a technology geek and liked technology, and the first Apple computer we got I was just fascinated with, so I started using it as an instructional tool in the classroom. And started teaching staff development classes for the school system where you taught other teachers how to use the computer.
That's cool.
And one day the lady who was the elementary math coordinator for the school system told me about a job opportunity one summer at Young Harris College where this lady was going to have a computer camp. And so I talked to her about working at being the lead teacher for the computer camp. And after that, a little while later, the lady came back to me and asked me if I knew a person named Elizabeth Lashley. I said, I don't know Elizabeth Lashley. I remember Mary Lashley, went to school with her. Well, she said, Elizabeth is Mary's mother. And I said, oh, that was my chemistry teacher in high school. So anyway, one summer I worked at a computer camp at Young Harris College, and our daughter Christy went, and her cousin Brad Edwards went there as well. But that didn't last very. Mrs. Lashley, it was not a very profitable business venture for her. And I understand she died just in the past year.
I don't think that's what I was thinking of, though. Was it YMCA leadership? What was the camp you went to?
What the YMCA Leaders School. Yeah, the volunteer work that we did at the Y was with a group called the Leaders Club, and most YMCA's have leaders clubs in them. But every summer I would go to a leaders school camp at Black Mountain, North Carolina, and I did that for 8 summers and enjoyed that very much.
Do you guys remember your first cars?
Is there a story behind it?
I don't know if you want to hear that.
No, I definitely do. I definitely do.
I had a little red Ford. It was the first model, I guess you'd say, of this car. It was called a Cougar. Remember those? And it's the first year they'd ever made it, and I was real proud of it. And my daddy was real proud of it, and he bought me a horn similar to one that he'd had in college, and you press down on the horn, it would go, ooh. And when I'd ride around the square, it was like a, oh God.
The attention of all the boys in the
Yeah. But yeah, I had a good time in my little red car, and
So how did you pick that one out? Or did you pick that one out?
I don't remember. I think I probably wanted a red car, but I think Daddy probably pretty much was the one that picked it out. I don't remember having much say so really, but
You were happy with it?
yeah. And I wrecked it 3 times in 1 week.
In 1 week.
In 1 week?
Tell us about each one.
Well, there was this boy that I was dating who was the disc jockey for the radio station. And the radio station was just straight down from my house, just straight down the road. And so it was easy to get to. And I went over there to see him the first time, and somebody ran into the back of me. It wasn't a serious wreck or anything, but it really, really, really upset me. You know, the first time I'd ever been hit. And then same thing happened 2 more times, and I was told not to go down there anymore. And then I got hit twice by doing that, so I guess I was not supposed to be there. But
Design.
yeah, but yeah, that was
What your
fun.
car did.
I was not very athletic like Dee Dee was, and I learned how to ride a bicycle when I was 13.
That sounds familiar to that.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not. I remember that memory coming to me.
And I tried my hand at swimming lessons at the Thomaston Country Club, and
Teaching them or doing
no,
them?
not teaching,
That's
just
okay.
trying to survive in the water. And I was so afraid, deathly afraid of the water. And you know, I tried lessons several times, and I was, you know, getting pretty old, and there were all these other little 3 and 4-year-olds trying to learn. But I finally did learn somehow how to let go of the side and float on my face and use my arms a little bit. And that's about where I am right now with swimming. So that pretty much covers my athletic ability.
Hey, Dee Dee, your car?
My first car was a 1968 Chevy 2 Nova.
Oh, nice.
I don't know what that means.
Well, it was about as inexpensive a car as could be purchased. It had a 3-speed transmission on the column, so you would shift like this, not down on the floor like you see most cars, and you know it didn't have carpet interior. The floor was kind of an asphalt kind of thing like you would put on a roof. It didn't have a fancy. All it had was an AM radio with a one speaker. You know, none of this fancy stuff. And so it was basic transportation. And the big purpose of it was for me to be able to get to college. to drive to Albany Junior College, and then to pick up my sister Judy when she got out of high school. And so a big part of it, of me having the car, was to be chauffeur duties. And because Mother had gone back to work and was teaching school, so she wasn't there to be able to pick up Judy, Bruce, and Cliff on all their things, and so I got to do that with that new car.
So did they buy the car, or did you pay for the car?
No, Dad paid for the car, but again, Dad had a great ability. If you'll see a list of maybe the 10 worst cars ever built, Dad bought most of them.
So is that how you got an interest in education? Was through your mother, or is
Yeah, that and working at the Y.
okay?
Because Mother didn't teach school. She taught school 1 year before I was born, in Warm Springs, and then she taught again once I was in high school to help pay for our college. Is why she went back to work as much as anything.
So how'd you get an education, Mimi?
I think it's because both sisters were teachers, and I spent a lot of time playing teacher to all the cats that I had in the afternoons. I would get on the picnic table, and all my cats would lie around after school, and I'd read the encyclopedia to them.
Nice.
Was there a particular letter that was your favorite?
No.
Encyclopedia, or did you
No.
just cycle through them?
And then I'd play school a lot in my bedroom, and I'd make up papers and grade the papers. I thought that was so much fun. And then Pat and Susie would come home from after they got jobs as teachers, and they'd bring me their spelling tests, and I'd grade the spelling test, and I thought that was so much fun.
Was it just as fun? 20 years later?
No.
After 17 years?
No, not at all.
Did you ever consider anything, or either one of you, did you ever consider any other major in college?
No.
Well, I would prefer to have gone on and gotten a doctorate in history and been a professor.
It's not
Did
too
you
late.
do that? So what's that?
Actually, one of my best friends did that.
Nice.
Worked his business career and went back to school and got his doctorate, and then started teaching at a junior college in South Carolina.
So did you guys have like a best friend growing up?
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear a little bit about your adventures with them.
Well, my best friend was Brenda Matthews, and we were actually related to each other. And
How so? Like super distant or
You
more
know
close?
that- yeah.
Okay.
Did you
Yeah.
know that you were related back then? or-
Yeah.
Okay.
Daddy, I think he had told me, a little bit about it, but I wasn't real sure. Neither one of us, I don't think, really understood exactly where the connection was. But
Yeah, I was just curious.
Not so much so that you showed up at the same family gathering.
no,
Okay,
no,
yeah.
not at all. But yeah, Brenda was a pretty wild little girl.
How so?
Okay. Ta-da.
And you were just a follower.
Yes.
We moved around a lot, so early on. So I didn't have any friends, from elementary school or growing up. It was once we got to Albany, and then I guess in high school there were kind of four guys that I was real good friends with, and I saw two of them at my 50th high school reunion this year. One of them was not there.
Short question, but what year did you guys join college and when did you graduate?
I graduated from college in 73.
Yeah, started in 1968. I got undergraduate degree in 72, master's degree in 74, and a specialist degree in 81.
And I can't remember. I think I got my master's probably 74 and specialist. It was after we were married.
Yeah, 80,
80.
maybe 84, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you guys have any favorite bands or groups that you liked growing up?
The Beatles.
The Beatles.
Yeah, very much so.
And Mimi got to see the Beatles at Atlanta Stadium.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it really was. Pat and Susie took me. And the Motown, entertainers, the Motown sound was real big when we were in high school. And the Four Seasons.
I'm more of a rock and roller than Mimi was.
Mimi, did you go to Woodstock?
No. I had nothing. I didn't want to have anything to do with Jimi Hendrix or any of that. Or Rolling Stones.
Yeah, my brother the other day when we got together for Christmas asked me why didn't I go to the Atlanta Pop Festival in 1970. I said, well, Jimmy Draffin and we talked about it. Jimmy was my friend who actually went back to school and got his doctorate and started teaching, but Jimmy and we talked about either going there or to Panama City, and for July the 4th, and we went to Panama City instead of going to the Atlanta Pop Festival, which was, in retrospect, the wrong decision, maybe, or maybe it was the right decision. But my first concert that I went to was Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs
Nice.
They had one of my still favorite songs, Little Red Riding Hood.
That's a great song.
Mm-hmm.
I was not much of a fan, and still today don't much care for Wooly Bully. Little Red Riding Hood was pretty good, I thought. We didn't have a whole lot of concert options in Albany in the 1960s.
That's fair.
Did you guys have a favorite book growing up?
You do, I'm sure.
Well, I read a lot, a real lot, and
Yeah, I think I remember you told me you used to go to like a library in your school and just read all the time.
yeah,
You're doodling.
yeah, I read a lot, and you know, in high school, I read a lot of science fiction. So I read a lot of Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury and all.
I love all those.
And but you know, I read a lot. It got me in trouble
In school.
in my history class. My 11th grade. I've told Doris this. My 11th grade history teacher, and I loved history, but she was just real boring. And so I would read during her class, and she told me to stop reading and pay attention, and I didn't. And so the only time like I said, I was a pretty well behaved kid, and the only time I ever got a cut in conduct in school was from that teacher, because I wasn't disruptive in class. I was just reading, and she gave me a cut in conduct for that. So after that, I just read the history book, our U.S. history book, all the time. I still didn't pay attention. She was so boring.
Yeah, I can't say I haven't done that.
And I read Nancy Drew books.
In the encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read all the Nancy Drew books and the Hardy
Bobbsey
Boy
Twins.
and the Hardy Boy books and the encyclopedia and the dictionary and.
So this one's for you, Mimi. So when I was talking to my aunt this past weekend, you know, I learned that when my grandmother got pregnant with my mother, who was the youngest, she was 40, I think.
Yeah, something like 38.
So she was older, and it was considered a taboo, and my grandmother wouldn't leave the house.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So and then apparently her water broke at 4 months, and the doctor said she was going to lose the baby.
Oh.
And luckily, the water came back, and
Yeah.
but after that, she was just like, I don't care anymore. You know.
Yeah.
So Jennifer had mentioned that you had something similar.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Being pregnant at that age, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mother was 38 when she became pregnant with me, and she would never tell me how old she was. And Doris was the same way. That was
Aunt Doris.
yeah, Aunt Doris.
Not-
Yeah, not little Doris. But yeah, that was a big thing. Whereas Daddy was very proud of it. Until somebody came up to him and said, I think he had me on his shoulders, and they said something like, your granddaddy will take care of you, honey. That didn't go over too big. But there was, because she had 10 and 12 years before, she had Pat and Suzanne, and then they had me. Yeah, that was a shocker.
yeah, I think between my mom's oldest sister, there's 14 years.
Oh, wow.
So-
Yeah, it's amazing how now, people don't even think anything about it.
Yeah.
But then it really was a hard thing.
Is there anything you want to ask your Mimi and Dee Dee?
Tell us about your experience with some significant news events, like where
The
were
landing
you,
on the moon or-
landing on the moon, and where were you when Kennedy died, and
I was in school when, well, let's see, Kennedy died. It seems like,
Eighth grade.
yeah, but I can remember, it seems like I can remember getting ready for school and listening to the TV when they were announcing or telling about Kennedy. Or, I don't know, he was killed in the middle of the day though, wasn't he?
we were in
So
school.
I don't know. I do remember. It seems like the first man landing on the first man around the moon. Was it Shepard that flew around the moon, or first man in space? One of those. I guess it was first. What was Shepard's distinction? Do you remember? He may have been the first one to go up and just orbit the.
The planet.
Yeah. But anyway, I remember getting ready for school and watching it on the TV with Mother and Daddy.
Well, certainly the space race was
Shepard was the first one to travel into space.
Yeah, I remember that.
well, certainly the space race was a really big deal for us. Now I remember in the 4th grade, and that must have been with Shepard. At the time, up until then, radios had tubes in them, and so they were not portable. You know, you have a radio that you would have in your house would be a big piece of furniture. Mm-hmm. But the first, when transistors were invented, this would have been early 60s. I had a very little 1 transistor portable radio, and I took it to school and hid it in my pocket and ran the earphone cable.
he was a good boy.
I didn't disturb a soul. It was just, and
Same method.
and listen to the NASA control talking about getting ready to launch those rockets, and that was just a huge deal. And so you went through the whole
And they talked about the monkeys.
program.
Yeah, the Russians used the monkeys to go up. I remember that.
Yeah, but through the Mercury and then the Gemini and then the Apollo program that actually ended up going to the moon. And as far as where I was, I guess I can say this now, but that was it. I was in junior college, and we had a bunch of friends who played cards, and I was over at one of those card guys' house playing cards, and when it was time to step on the moon, we all had a can of beer, and as he stepped off, we popped a beer.
Did you shotgun the beer, or did you
No, I don't think I did that.
No keg stands?
And but that was certainly a big deal.
That seems like a good toast.
So do you guys remember your first television, first color television for that matter?
Yeah.
No, I don't. I mean, we had one, but I don't remember it being a big deal. I mean, I remember the radio being a piece of furniture. Vaguely remember that.
But yeah, I mean, as far as Sunday night you had Walt Disney's Wide World of Color, and you had Ed Sullivan, and then the biggie was Bonanza.
And Gunsmoke.
And Gunsmoke. Now, not all of that's another thing. Before cable and all that, you didn't necessarily have all the networks that you could get at your house, and so we couldn't get the network that Gunsmoke was on. So we know it's not part of us growing up, but we got NBC with Bonanza and Ed Sullivan, and since the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, that's what really mattered. The other thing was Sunday night, it conflicted with church. And on Sunday, the Williams were going to be at church. And we were there Sunday morning for Sunday school and for Sunday service. And then in the evening at 6:15, we were back again for training union, and then another service after that.
Wow.
And that's where the problem came in.
The
Is
fourth service.
is if the preacher went on too long, then you weren't going to see Ed Sullivan, or at least the music groups that were on. You know, they'd be on at the first of the show, and you knew you were going to miss that, but they'd be on at the end of the show, and you hoped that you could get out of downtown Albany and home before that last group was on in color.
And y'all were Baptist, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know, when I was growing up, you know, after church, usually we went out to eat either to my grandparents' house or we'd all go out as a family somewhere. Did you guys have any kind of traditions like that after church?
Well, y'all didn't go.
We didn't,
Y'all didn't go to church?
not very often.
They were Methodist. But no, we almost always went home and ate. We were very, very, very rarely went out to eat. Every once in a while, we would go to Davis Brothers cafeteria and get some orange jiggly Jello and go through the line. But most of the time, we went home and ate.
Go.
Mother would get the newspaper and go back into their bedroom, and she would read the newspaper that Sunday afternoon and take a nap. And we knew absolutely don't disturb her, because that was her private time. Dad would often go back into work.
On Sunday.
Going back to the news events, what about the Cold War? Were y'all in the generation to hide under your desks or
Yeah.
practice those drills?
They had some fallout. A good friend of mine her daddy built a fallout shelter, and I thought that was just the most exciting thing I'd ever seen in my life. I got to go in it, and
Were your parents worried at all? You
I don't think so. If they were, they didn't tell me.
Yeah, Albany had an Air Force base that had a B-52 squadron stationed there with nuclear weapons. And so during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there were anti-missile bases around the Air Force base, and you know, we'd be in school or whatever, and these big, huge B-52 bombers would be just lumbering around town. You know, they just hanging up in the air. It seemed like, and during the missile crisis, we knew that Albany would be targeted from Russian missiles because of the presence of the B-52s and the atomic bombs that they carried. So we were scared about that. You remember, you know, there were bomb shelters all over the place. There would be these yellow triangular shaped signs that would show buildings where you would go down in there, and there would be supplies or whatever stationed in there. Of course, it wouldn't have done any good, but if you were hit by an atomic bomb, but it was all there, and yeah, it was could be a scary thing.
So I'm trying to think of a good question about your grandparents. I mean, she's got some good ones about her grandparents.
I don't. Yeah, I know so little about mine. My grandparents were divorced, and
That's kind of a rarity back then.
yeah, it was very much a rarity, and we weren't even sure about that until he did some genealogy work. And my grandfather is buried up in New York
Yeah, Schenectady.
in an unmarked grave.
Oh, I can do that.
And Pat and I are thinking about trying to get something done about that now. But it was really strange how that ended up. But my grandmother ended up living with my aunt and uncle, Aunt Doris and Uncle Carl, from the time they were married until she died. About 50 years, wasn't it?
Wow.
She, I don't know, she was old from the time I remember her, as a child. We would go and visit her and Aunt Doris, I remember, and Aunt Doris would always have the most luscious chocolate cookies.
Always coming back to the sweets.
She would. I
Those are the
mean,
prominent memories.
she had bought the most wonderful chocolate covered, the latest Keebler cookies, that had just come out, and it was just heaven. But and they had cats. I remember that. But
Now, was this your mother's parents?
yeah. And my daddy's father had died when he was younger, so I never knew him. And his mother had died, and so I never got to know them at all. But I remember he had an uncle, and he was married and lived in Talbotton, and Daddy always wanted Pat and me to go down there and visit on Sundays down in Talbotton, and they lived in they weren't very wealthy, and you have to remember my mother was a city girl. She was from Atlanta, and she would always discourage me from going, and Pat, Mother would discourage us from going because they did not have indoor plumbing. And just really, scared me, into thinking that was a very bad thing, And now I really, really regret it that I didn't spend more time with Daddy's, because other than an aunt that lived in Florida that we visited a little bit, that I'm named after, that was the only relative still living at the time of his, and he really loved his uncle. But I remember that they had an outhouse, and that was just not safe for me to go down there with that outhouse. Things that,
So both with that and the fact that she, the fact that she always insisted on going to Atlanta, that I'm assuming she looked down on the non-rural, on the non-urban areas.
Very much so, but yeah. So, but it's kind of sad, that
What about your grandparents, Dee?
Well, again, parents' family was in Texas and we were in Georgia. So there really wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for me to spend a whole lot of time with them. We would go out to Texas every other summer, every third summer maybe.
Tell them how you got out there.
Well, twice this is when there were 4 kids. Dad drove us to Atlanta, and we got on a Greyhound bus and left Atlanta in the night and drove a whole day and half of another day, and ended up in Amarillo, Texas, after a day and a half on the bus. And I read my books, and
What did the rest of them do? Did you read
I read the books, and that was
He was oblivious to any of it.
what they did was what they did. But it was a long ride to get out there. But again, this was to go out to the my mother's parents in the Panhandle of Texas, and we would go visit with them, and it just seemed like they were old.
We're at 20% better.
Oh, okay.
They just seemed old.
But you did learn that he liked National Geographic.
Well, he had a whole collection of National Geographics, so I read National Geographics when I was out there.
And the arrowheads. And
He collected arrowheads, and I guess my favorite thing I ever did with my grandfather out there was a couple of times we would go out and walk through the creek beds there and turn over rocks and look for arrowheads out there. And of all the things that he had, Mother sold his Indian artifact collection after he died, and I wish that she had saved that for us to have rather than selling it. But I don't know. You know, both of the Mother's parents, they just seemed old when we were out there visiting, and didn't do a whole, didn't have a whole lot of interaction with them. And then Dad's parents, his mother died when I was 1 year old, so I never really knew my paternal grandmother. Granddad was he was a gruff old man. He was kind of neat. And again, what I remember about him was getting his old beat up pickup truck and riding through his pasture, looking at his cows. He loved his cows, even though he had them slaughtered. And he had a Brahma bull that he was real proud of. But that was, again, we would maybe 3 days, maybe four, maybe 5 days in Paris, Texas, every 2 or 3 years. So you just really didn't get to know your grandparents well. I've still got first cousins that I haven't met.
Oh, wow.
So we were in Georgia and they were in Texas, so that's kind of the way it was.
So, this may sound like a strange question, but how did race relations affect you guys growing up?
we could talk for a long time about that.
Obviously, civil rights was in the '60s became a big deal.
Yeah.
Our parents were Southerners, and mine for sure, and I don't think it was any different with Terry's. They saw no problem with segregation.
Yeah.
And I think to the day they died, they really weren't quite sure what the problem with it was. I'm not sure there was a whole lot of growth with that.
Well, so, I was talking to my aunt, and, she was talking about how, once in a while, she would hang out with, a person of another race, and how there was a taboo. She's not to do that, and things like that. Did you guys ever get into trouble or anything like that?
There was
No.
there was not the opportunity
No.
for us. I mean, you just that the schools, the school that I went to, it was 10th grade before I went to an integrated, desegregated high school.
I mean, that's pretty late on.
So I was 15 before that, and even then there were only just a few students who were brave enough to try and integrate the school.
Tell them about your roommate in college.
I guess my first, there's a couple of things you grow and you learn that maybe things aren't quite right, and then what your parents tell you are not exactly right either. Again, I mentioned church, and we were there every Sunday, and again, the early mid '60s, there was a big civil rights movement in Albany. Martin Luther King came after his work in Montgomery. He came to Albany and was put in jail and led marches and all. And one Sunday, after Sunday school, the kids would stand around waiting for church to start. to go in for that, and standing around, and our church, to me at the time, it had these biggest, steepest, longest set of granite steps going from the sidewalk into the church. And this black couple walked up those steps and were turned away by the deacons. They were not permitted to attend a church service.
That's crazy.
And afterwards, I asked my mother, well, why not? And she said, well, they were trying to go to church for the wrong reason. And the reason was not to worship, but to integrate the church. They didn't, which was probably not, it, you know, I mean, that's certainly why they were there.
Yeah.
But, and the preacher was fired because he wasn't strong enough against desegregation. He was willing to at least talk about it, and that was
taboo too.
that was taboo. So that was one of the things that, you know, kind of changed my mind about it. And the other was, there is at the corner of Slappy Drive and 3rd Avenue in Albany was the Palmyra drugstore, and I rode my bicycle a lot if I wasn't reading or at the Y or whatever. I had my bicycle, and I had a newspaper bag attached to the handlebars, and I had ridden somewhere, and it was some hot August day, and this is before school started in August again. August was still prime summer school vacation time. But anyway, so I drove up to Palmyra drugstore. I was probably going to get a Coke or a candy bar or something, and threw my bicycle down, and there was this little tiny black lady standing there. She had on a white starched housekeeper's uniform, black crinkly hair pulled back into a bun, and she's standing at this door at the entrance to Palmyra drugstore, and she asked me, can I go in this door, or do I have to walk around to the back door to go in? And that just hit me as this is absolutely wrong, that this lady is scared to walk in the front door of the drugstore. And like I say, I could still see that today. It was hot, you know, and she was there just as prim and
all decked out like.
And you know, and so that just told me it was wrong. But what Terry mentioned was transferred to University of Georgia as a junior, and so most everybody I knew had already gone off to school, and already had their roommates, and they were doing what they were going to do. So I transferred, went to Athens. I didn't ask for a roommate or anything, so I filled my Chevy 2 Nova to the brim with all my clothes and my records, and drive to Athens. And my friend Jimmy Draffin, this is the same guy who I didn't go to the Atlanta Pop Festival with, and who later got his doctorate in history. He meets me in the parking lot of Russell Hall and says, Todd, I met your roommate. He's black. I said, you're just kidding me, Jimmy. Well, I get up to my room at Russell Hall, and sure enough, he's black. And, you know, I said, well, okay. And, you know, so called my parents, let them know that I'd gotten to Athens safely. This is before cell phones and texting and all that. And, so by the way, my roommate's black. and the whole world just exploded. You're gonna have to do something about that. You can't stay there. I said, well, just calm down, but you know, it was. My parents were extremely upset about it, and you know, one of their friends said, "Joe, you've got to go up there and take care of this." And of course, the last thing in the world I wanted was to Joe to drive to Athens and take care of it. But I did, but it meant after a couple of weeks, the housing issue things settled down, and I was able to go to another, live with another guy up to the 10th floor of Russell Hall.
Did Joe come take care of it?
No, because I did.
You had to.
But it was, you know, it's kind of one of those things that, you know, I was fine just, you know, staying there. I knew I was going to move out after a quarter anyway, but the racial business was.
We were right in the middle of it.
Right in the
Yeah.
middle of it.
And I lived in a situation like The Help, the movie The Help. My house, I mean, they could have filmed that movie in my house because we had a separate bathroom for our maid. And I can remember being afraid to go in that bathroom. I can still remember how that felt. And she could never park in the driveway. She always parked on the side of the curb on the side street. It was just, you know, I can still remember the water fountains and the whole 9 yards that were separate. I remember going with Daddy to, every now and then he'd take me with him when he went to pay. Her name was Essie. And we'd go down to, there were several houses where the blacks lived in Thomaston. It's called Lincoln Park. And it was very close to our house. But I can remember, I mean, this sounds terrible, but I can still remember thinking how fascinating that. I mean, it was fascinating because those streets were not paved, and I mean, it was just, it was like a different world.
Well, it was a different time.
Yeah.
But it's still there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are the streets paved now?
I don't know.
Probably, but
Yeah.
I would think so.
Lincoln Park and those houses are still there.
Yeah.
So both of y'all had help in the house, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. You had.
Well, for us,
what's her
it was
name?
we had a housekeeper who came in and mostly ironed and cleaned a little bit one day a week. It wasn't a daily thing, and we did not have a separate bathroom.
But Essie came every day, and we had no washing machine, no dryer, and 3 girls with dresses, you know, and she washed and hung those up to dry and then ironed every last one of those dresses. And we always sent the sheets and the towels out to the laundry because Daddy owned part of the laundry, I think, at that time, or the laundry. But she did everything, and I can still remember in my bedroom, Daddy saying, "Don't make up that bed. Essie won't have anything to do." You know, so it was just the opposite of, here are your chores, you know, be a responsible person. And I had a hard time, you know, when I got out on my own because I didn't have any chores. I mean, I didn't have a job. Never had a job until I graduated from college.
So what was a typical day like for your mothers?
Well, Mother didn't work. She had, every now and then we'd have the bridge club come over and you know, we had the same thing served for the bridge club. The chicken salad, some little brownies, and some punch, the same punch every time when the bridge club came. And Pat used to complain about it because she had to help Mother cut the celery for the chicken salad, and she said the pieces were never small enough to suit Mother. But I mean, it had to be perfect, just like in the help.
Well, Pat's real big on details like that anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, Mother didn't work, and Daddy was an insurance real estate guy, and he went to work, and
So, but what did she do all day if she wasn't working?
not much, I don't think. I think she may have done some with gardening. I don't really know, but we've all said that was her downfall, because even though she had a college education, she didn't use it, and it did not make her feel productive, in that sense, and so she had nothing to fall back on. But that's the way it was, that day and time, and I think it must have been a kind of a boring existence, except for her girls looking after us.
What did Grandma do all day?
It was somewhat similar, but with 4 kids, there was always a baby, a young one to take care of and to look after all day long, and cart us around town to our ball games and Judy's dancing. I mean, that kept her busy. Working around the house. I mean, cleaning the house, and she had her Baptist Ladies Circle group. They would meet, I guess monthly, but once a week, ever how it was. She spent lots and lots of time going to baseball games and football games and basketball games and dance lessons and swimming lessons, and again, in church work, and that's pretty much what she did.
What did y'all eat? What were your typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner? What was typical?
Daddy pretty much dictated what we had. It was more of a, if Daddy doesn't like it, we're not going to have it. And let's see. We'd always have hot dogs on Saturday. I always look forward to that. And I don't
Did you
know.
have breakfast every morning? Would y'all eat together?
No, it was just me. I mean, my most vivid memories were when they had gone. Pat and Suzanne had gone off to school, and it was just me. Not really. I never had much appetite in the morning. I was real thin little shrimp of a child. I think I really was next to the tiniest child in the class.
Did you take your lunch to school?
When I got older in high school, I did.
Did you make it yourself?
Probably. I can remember eating or trying to eat the elementary school cafeteria food, and it was so bad I couldn't eat. And then I'd come home with a headache because I hadn't had anything to eat all day. It was just abominable, the food that we had. I mean, it really was.
Hasn't changed much.
And then,
Was there a mark?
Yeah.
Fixing the food back then?
And then you see, when you get to the cafeteria after when you're with the teacher, and it's not much better. It really wasn't. But, some of the foods have changed now. Like congealed salads back then were real big. You remember that? And we used to have salads that were like you'd put down a lettuce leaf and it'd be a canned pear. And some Velveeta cheese. You never saw any other cheese besides Velveeta. grated with a little maraschino cherry on top. That'd be a salad sitting in the, or a canned pineapple ring with a little Velveeta cheese grated with a little,
And some mayonnaise.
yeah, always mayonnaise.
I'm sorry, this sounds horrible.
And stewed tomatoes.
Sounds like the food in the school wasn't much better than at home.
Yeah. We never had meatloaf. Daddy didn't like meatloaf, so we never had meatloaf. Seems like we had pork chops, and Essie would do the cooking. And she would fry them too hard. I remember that. And chicken and dumplings. Tomato aspic. Y'all probably don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I thought saying that doesn't sound familiar.
It's like a congealed tomato glob. Just it's congealed.
You would pour it in a nice mold. And
Yeah.
Take it out of the mold. It looked.
But it was like tomato juice congealed. It's horrible. But that was big back then with the ladies. And I was trying to think.
Date rolls were a biggie.
Yeah.
What is it?
A date roll, that was real popular.
And at Christmas, you'd
rum,
take
rum, rum balls and bourbon balls were big.
you'd take a date and stuff it with a whole pecan or half pecan, and then roll it in granulated sugar. And you do about 100 of them and put them on a plate. And that was supposed to be really good.
What was your favorite out of all those? Like all the food you had when you were a child?
No hot dogs.
Yeah.
Well,
Chocolate.
I was about to say chocolate.
Chocolate. Essie would make a chocolate pie, and Daddy liked chocolate. And she'd make it out of, she had wonderful pastry and biscuits. I mean, she was one of these people that really knew how to make, and I've never appreciated it like I should have. But that was why Daddy said he hired her, because of her pastry. But she could make great pie pastry, and she would pour Jell-O pudding in as the filling, and then it would congeal, harden or whatever, and we'd slice it, and that would be the chocolate pie. And I can remember scraping the chocolate pudding off the pastry and not eating any of that pastry, that homemade pastry that she made.
You could get the box of chocolate.
Yeah. So.
What about you, Lydia?
Well, I usually fix breakfast. When there were the four kids, and Cliff was real little. He was a baby, but for Bruce, Judy, and I would usually fix breakfast before school every morning. We'd do cinnamon toast or cheese toast.
All the different toasts.
Yeah, we would do lots of boxes of cereal. We went through lots of cornflakes and Cocoa Puffs and that whole deal. But that was my job, was to get all that done. My mother was getting everybody dressed and ready to go to school. And then, of course, for lunch, we ate at school. And I kind of liked my school lunches. And then mother was a decent, pretty good cook. She had, with all six of us, we certainly didn't eat extravagantly, but she could cook real good fried chicken. And then, like Terry said, we had pork chops and hamburgers and salmon croquettes, and we had meatloaf, and there was something Swiss, what we call Swiss steak, and country fried steak,
Spaghetti.
kind of things. We had spaghetti, and then of course there was always the wonderful Chef Boyardee pizzas.
Oh yeah.
Pizza or
I can remember when that first came out, and Pat and Susie came home with it, and I thought they were the best tasting things I've ever put in my mouth.
I tried making one for you
did you?
early on, yeah. And you got mad at me because I put breakfast sausage on the pizza instead of Italian sausage.
Tastes are too
I
extravagant.
don't remember that at all.
But we at supper we all ate together. Now that was certainly important. Is all 6 of us were there for supper. Now Dad worked all day long, almost every day of the week. But when he would come in, and I can still see him, he would empty his shirt pockets of all the papers and stuff that he had from work, set them down. We would watch the news from 6 to 6:15, and have supper on the table, and we all ate supper together, and that was real important. It wasn't until I guess I was in junior college and working at night that we weren't always. I didn't always sit down to supper and eat with everybody.
It's amazing they were able to get all those baseball, football, dance stuff done.
Well, it was over by that time.
Yeah.
So did you have a favorite food?
I mean, of what Mother fixed, the fried chicken, you know. Like I said, we certainly didn't eat extravagantly.
Yeah.
Now she, I like Mother's German chocolate cake. I've always liked coconut, and her pecan pie was good. You know, after that.
So, what are some of your earliest memories? Do you have another question?
I just wanted to ask another thing about food.
Okay, go ahead and ask another
It
thing
was
about
just,
food.
so I know, Dee Dee, you said that you guys didn't eat out much, but like, how often did you guys maybe like? Did you have a favorite?
We'd usually go shopping on Saturdays to Atlanta, and we'd go out to some nice places. And Daddy would try to, it'd be all of us. I can remember all of us sitting around the table, and Daddy was big on eating steaks. And he always wanted me to order a steak, but I just didn't have any appetite because one of the places we went to was called Heron's. And it's not in Atlanta anymore, but they always put a little bowl of cinnamon rolls. I don't know why I've never seen a restaurant do that since, but they were little homemade cinnamon rolls. And I would just sit there and eat those and fill up on that. Yeah. And he would get so disgusted because I wouldn't eat a steak. And but he took us to some nice restaurants.
Heron's had an important role in desegregation in Atlanta. Again,
Do they have a sit-in or something?
well, again, you know, up until a certain point, you know, you didn't, you know, the restaurants were not integrated. And while Lester Maddox at his Pickwick restaurant, he was threatening to club somebody with a baseball bat, Heron's, which was one of the best restaurants in Atlanta, did open their doors
Oh, that's awesome.
to all citizens.
But that was a Greek family, wasn't it? Owned by a Greek family? I think it was. But yeah, we went out, you know, and Daddy liked to spend money on food because Daddy liked to eat.
See, while Terry is in Atlanta eating at restaurants, nice restaurants like Heron's, the one time a year we would come to Atlanta, we would stay at the Henry Grady Hotel and walk across the street to the cafeteria
And eat Jell-O.
and eat green jiggly Jello.
What was it like for y'all dad to come to Atlanta? Living in Albany? Was
Yeah.
it a big city? Were you all excited? Was it a
Oh, sure. I mean, we would come to go shopping at Rich's, or maybe go to a baseball game. Now, you asked earlier about how we met, and kind of one of the things that, to me, it kind of says maybe it was meant to be.
Yeah.
Was, again, you got all 6 of us piled into a car, driving to Atlanta, and there were 3, maybe 4 things that we would always look forward to and talk about on our way. And one of them is right after we went through Americus on US 19, there was a kind of a part of the highway that was covered with magnolia trees on both sides. It was an arch, and it was pretty nice to look at. I mean, it didn't take a whole lot to impress us.
You weren't riding up 75 either.
75 was not there yet. And then we would get to Thomaston, and invariably we would ride past this house in Thomaston, and Dad would say, "That's where the Hightowers live." Dad was in the textile business, and the Hightowers owned the textile mills in Thomaston there. Well, I'm sure at one time I saw somebody out in the front yard of this house in Thomaston that Dad always talked about. And we'd get through Thomaston, and the next place is Zebulon, Georgia. And in Zebulon, there was this place. It had a lake that you could see from US 19, and there was a dam, and then there was this big rock, and there were a bunch of goats there. And so, in our ride to Atlanta, we would talk about the magnolia trees, this house where the Hightowers lived, and this lake where there were goats. And then we would get on into Atlanta. Well, later, after Terry and I met, it was time for me to go meet Mother. And so, we head down US 19 and get into Thomaston, and she takes me around the street and says, "This is what tells me this house where we need to turn in the driveway." And I said, "You've got to be kidding me. This was the house that Dad always said was where the Hightowers lived."
That's crazy.
Isn't it?
But instead it was where the Carters lived. And this person I saw out there on one of my trips was probably this person here.
Aww.
Tell him about Zebulon, though.
That's cute.
I was gonna say, but what does it mean to be the Hightowers house, though? Explain that to them.
Well, the Hightowers owned the textile mills in town, and
And what was a mill to a mill town? Or
well, this
it would be the people who owned the factory that everybody worked at.
yeah. I mean, the Hightowers were probably the wealthiest folks in town. The textile school at Georgia Tech was named for the Hightower family. They donated the money to build the building where the textile school was. But anyway, so later, after I suppose we were married by this time, and it's time for us to. And I'd met Terry's sister and brother-in-law, Joe and Pat Edwards, and it came time for us to go visit with them at the cabin in Zebulon. So we drive down US 19 again, and we get to Zebulon, and she says, "Turn here." Oh my goodness. This is the lake where the goats are.
It's funny how things turn out.
Is there a connection with the magnolia trees?
No, other than the street that we lived on in Albany for most of the time. And again, like I said, we moved around a lot, and we moved around in Albany once we got there. But the house that we lived in for the longest amount of time, the streets had these just gorgeous oak trees that formed a canopy over the street. And you would drive down the street and just be under this canopy of oaks. It was really pretty. And so he had that canopy of magnolia trees there on the highway.
Where was that? Oh, I don't remember seeing that.
North of Americus,
Oh.
between Americus and Ellaville.
So what are some of your earliest
Yeah, I was
memories?
about to say.
Yours is the raincoat.
You're not going to drop that, are you?
Tell them what you
Yeah,
did. That's a cute little
I
story.
wasn't- yeah.
I don't remember a whole lot about it.
Why does it-
Other than
Let's have Mimi tell it. What does Mimi remember about the raincoat?
I just remember you did not want to wear. It was a yellow raincoat, and you were a little bitty,
I was in first grade.
and you did not want to wear it. And so somehow or other, I just remember you telling me that you took it off and hid it behind a bush.
Somebody else's yard.
And
And I was going to pick it up on the way back home from school.
but that person, somebody found it and told your mother about, or it had your name in it or something. Somehow she found out. That's one of the few bad things he's told me that he did, other than the ice cream incident going across the street in the busy intersection.
So, Mom, tell us about the house in the Highlands.
The house in the Highlands.
Highlands, North Carolina.
Oh, I guess I was about, I don't know. Oh, I was little. Pat was, I guess they were in college when Daddy built a house, Mother and Daddy built a house in Highlands. Because they wanted a place that had cool weather. They were always hot in Thomaston, and so it was a, you know, there was nothing in Highlands at the time, and we built a house on a hill, little Bearpin Mountain, and it was really a mountain, and we had to go up there every weekend while it was being built to see about the construction and all. And I would get sick in the back of the car, Doris, every single time.
Every time I went to North Carolina, I'd always get sick also for some reason. So I guess it's genetic.
Yeah, I think it must be. You've gotten it from me. But, yeah. And so I spent most of my time lying down in the back seat on those trips. But I remember they'd pick me up from school. This is after Pat and Susie were still in, they were in college. And pick me up from school, and we'd take off up there. And I hated every minute of it. But it was a one-story house. And I remember Mother asking me, what kind of beds do you want in your bedroom? And I had misunderstood the difference between twin and full. And I must have been pretty little. But anyway, I ended up with twin beds, which I did not like. But we had a guy that lived behind us, or that lived next door to us, I think, liked to go out and look at where they were blasting granite off the mountain. And Mother always thought that was so, you know, she was so protective, overprotective. And she was so afraid to let me go with the others to visit, to go down to where they were blasting or to look at it or anything. But it was neat to go up there because sometimes it would snow. And we'd have to put chains on the tires.
I remember my grandparents doing that.
And that was the only snow I remember seeing, I think, when I was little. But it was a neat place to go because it was nice and cool, and it was real pretty in the fall. we would go on hikes but he sold it to a guy from Alaska when I was about 10, I guess.
So how long did you have the house for?
Probably about 5 years. Not very long.
So how were birthdays growing up? Did you guys make a big deal out of them, or were they just
My
Dee's, nope.
my grandmother, they made a big deal about mine. My grandmother and my aunt that lived in Atlanta, like I said, they lived with each other, always went to a bakery and got a real fancy cake and for my birthday, and they'd come down, and sometimes I'd have a party, and they'd always give me frilly panties which got to be kind of embarrassing after a while, but I don't know why that was such a big thing. I think that had somewhat of a custom back then, because it was something I expected every time I had a birthday. But one time I remember I had a doll, and the panties had doll baby panties to go with it that matched, and I thought that was a big deal. But the other side of that little story about the panties is when I was in 2nd grade, when you'd go outside in elementary school and the teachers would just sit in a semicircle, and you didn't have any structured PE or anything like they have now. You just went out there, and they had tetherball, or you had, what was that thing that was so dangerous that went round and round?
Merry-go-round.
Yeah, merry-go-round, and you had big old slides, and jungle gyms, and you just kind of were on your own. But I never will forget the 2nd grade teachers calling me up to their little semicircle one day. Of course, they'd be fired for this now, but and saying, and the 2nd grade teacher, my parents knew all the teachers real well. It was kind of like a family deal, and my teacher called me up there and said, "Terry, come up here a minute." And when I got up there, she pulled up the back of my dress so that they could all see my cute little frilly panties.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
I'll never forget that. That was...
that's...
It really didn't bother me then, but they couldn't do that now.
Yeah. Good reason.
But,
So did you wear dresses to school every day?
oh, yeah. Yeah, that was, real... everybody else got to wear, and when they got a little old, everybody else got to wear flats that just had a little strap over them, but I had to wear saddle Oxfords because my foot was so narrow I couldn't fit into any flats.
What's a saddle
A saddle Oxford, you've seen them there. It's white on the front and white on the back. It's a lace-up shoe, and it has black in the middle.
I think I know what you're talking about, yeah.
But they were lace-up, so I had to have lace-up shoes because my foot. And they put your foot in this machine. Do you remember this? Y'all probably don't.
I mean, I know exactly what shoe you're talking about. I mean, I didn't have to wear them. But.
Yeah. But when we were little, we'd always have to go to Atlanta to the shoe store, and they'd always put your foot, Ty remembers this, under this big wooden x-ray machine.
Really?
It looked kind of like a podium that somebody would stand behind, but it had some type of an x-ray thing in it, and it was supposed to help tell, if the shoe properly fit the child. But, and since they've, certainly been...
Get way overexposed to x-rays.
It's a wonder it didn't, I don't know if anybody ever had ill effects from it or not, but... I did that every year when we went to get shoes. And Thompson, Bowling Lee, I'll never forget it. And, I never could wear the flats. I was always so disappointed I couldn't wear those. But, so, just being dragged from one store to another in Atlanta was one of my first
What did you do for your birthday, Dad?
We had a birthday party. I'm sure not every year. I can't say that I remember a whole lot about it one way or the other. Mother would usually fix a German chocolate cake because that's what I liked.
Would it be something that you'd be looking forward to for weeks? Or?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a big deal. And I'm sure my sister Judy was more into the birthday party thing than I was. I don't remember it being a big event one way or the other.
Do you think your parents treated Judy differently, her being the only girl?
Not really. I think we all got pretty much the same amount of attention, and
That speaks well for your parents.
and all we played with each other a lot. You know, when
Tell them what you did to each
played
other.
a lot of games. We played board games with each other a lot, or went outside and played hide and go seek, or flyers and skinners, or
Through those things, yeah.
it's a
Tell 'em
it's a
about
baseball
throwing those
game.
things
Okay.
at each other.
Huh?
Tell them about throwing those things at each other.
Well, in South Georgia, there's a plant called sand spur, and it's
Spurs?
and we saw those at the beach this summer,
Those little things that stick, all over.
and we would have sand spur battles. You would a perfectly placed one would be right in the middle of the small of your back, where you can't reach to get it to pull it off.
So, did you guys take many vacations growing up? And if so, where'd you guys go?
Well, Terry's family certainly had a whole lot more interesting vacations than we did. Our vacations when we went anywhere was mostly to go out to Texas, in which we kind of talked about earlier. It wasn't, and other than that, we went to Panama City to the beach for maybe a long weekend every once in a while. I guess Dad worked a whole lot. He just would not take off very much and do a vacation. There was one time we did a Florida trip. We went to Ocala, a 6-gun territory, and then over to Daytona and saw Marine Land, and then up to up the coast a little bit, and then back home. But and then one summer, I guess when I was 20, so it'd been my last family trip. Mother took the 4 of us to Washington D.C., and we went to the Smithsonian and all the places that you would see there. But as far as really neat vacations, there wasn't a whole lot of that. Now Terry got to go off and do a whole lot more than what I did.
When I was 12, well, I guess I would start with when I was 2. I don't remember any of this, but we drove all the way across the United States and hit every single state. Somehow, I don't know how Daddy did that.
50 states? Or 48,
Huh?
48 states? Or
Yeah. And I was still, I think I was still in diapers. I know I was still taking a bottle, but I don't remember anything about that. But that was most unusual. Daddy really liked to travel. When Mother and Daddy were in college, they went on something called the Georgia Caravan, and Daddy helped, I guess, organize and lead the group. They went out west with a group of college students, and Mother always told me this story about she was in the tent one night, and you got to remember when this was, in the 1930s or late 20s. Of course, there were no animal restrictions back then like there are now, but she claims that a bear hit her, went into the tent and scraped her across her forehead one time. But but when I was 10 or 12, we went out to Mexico. We drove out to Mexico, which was bizarre. You never hear anybody doing something like that. I don't know why he wanted to do that. Suzanne was not with us, but Pat took off that summer and came with us and drove. She did most of the driving, and has sworn ever since then that she'd never go back to Mexico, no matter what. She hated it.
What did you guys do in Mexico?
Well, we went to a bullfight, which was real exciting. Went to a place called the Cathedral of Guadalupe, where the people were crawling on their hands and knees down to the front. And, as a child, I thought that was, such a big deal. And they had the sacrificial objects, in the front of the church, the Catholic Church, and I didn't know anything about that. So, Mother had to explain all that to me, and you had to wear something on your head, and when you went in the church, and went to the University of Mexico. I remember seeing that. Went to Acapulco, and at the time, Elvis Presley had made a movie at the place where we stayed, and I thought that was a big deal until I got out of the swimming pool and had red dots all over me.
What was that?
I don't know. Mother thought I was going to die. But, and then Pat and I got sick. Mother kept saying, "Don't drink the water." I remember that. We had to drink. She would only let us drink Coke out of the bottle.
Boy, what a problem that was.
And, oh, goodness. Pat and I had some kind of stomach thing. Both of us got sick while we were there. And, but I remember the little children coming up to us and begging, trying to sell gardenias to us. And I, of course, as a child, had never seen anything like that in my life. So, it was an education. I remember a lot about that trip. It was really, really, I really liked it, whereas Pat did not. Of course, she was in her 20s.
How old were you when you
I was about 12.
Okay.
She would have been 24. But, and then Mother and Daddy took me to Hawaii when I graduated from high school. Spent a week or so there, and
Excuse me.
that was beautiful. It was wonderful. It was a great trip. And Mother and I went to Bermuda after Daddy died. Spent about a week there, and
I made trips to New York City.
yeah, Mother and Daddy liked to go to New York at Christmas especially, and all of us would go up there. And
Did you ever fly, or were they always riding?
oh no, we never flew anywhere. I don't know why.
Were they
Todd and I have talked about that. I don't know why Daddy was against. I don't know if he was against flying or what it was. If it was just a new thing
Maybe
and he
he
didn't
was,
trust it.
Yeah, scared of it maybe.
Maybe.
I'm sure your mother was frightened of it.
Oh, yes.
Talk a little bit about your dad's leg.
Oh yeah, my daddy had an artificial leg, and I didn't realize this, but Pat said he got pushed in high school down the steps and it never healed right. And he had to have his leg amputated when after he and Mother married. And Pat was, I think she was maybe a year old or just being born. No, she was a year old because Suzanne was on the way, she said. And then later, I don't know how much later, he went out to Mayo and had that done. And then later, a little while later, he had to have it done again for some reason.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, but right at the knee. But that was in the 40s, and prosthetics back then were not what they are now, and it caused a lot of pain. It was very uncomfortable. I remember him having to go back to Atlanta. That was one thing we did when we went to Atlanta, was he always had to go to the prosthesis place and have it adjusted. Pat said she remembers he had to wear a strap around his neck that the leg was attached to. I don't remember that, but I do remember him taking it off. And you know, at the time, to a child, it's extremely interesting. You know, all of that.
Did anybody ever think it was a war injury back then?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they did. And I can remember Mother saying that when he was in, you know, he was in a loan business for a while before he did the insurance, and people would come to him wanting a loan after the war, and tell him this sob story about, you know, how they didn't have anything and woe is me and everything. And she said he would just come out from behind the desk, you know, and show him his leg. It was like, you know, I had to struggle with this. But it was hard. It was real hard. Much harder than I realized at the time, I'm sure. Especially Mother has told me many times it was very difficult to try to help him with her being pregnant and, you know, him having that surgery, what they had to go through, you know. She had to help him bathe and trying to take care of a 1-year-old and being pregnant at the same time. But, yeah. Anyway. He's a strong man.
All right, this has been fun.
You know,
Alright.
y'all ask some interesting
Yeah, that
questions
was
that
good.
bring up memories we hadn't thought about in a long time. It wasn't as
Alright.
painful as I thought it
Yeah. Going on for an hour and 46 minutes.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sure they're tired, Doris.
was. Those were good
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, well,
How did y'all come up with all those?
he did.
Very good.
Dad did. I thought he was.
Or maybe it was, I don't know. It was just questions that were popping up in my
But
head.
sometimes it's hard to put yourself in that person's shoes and think what would have been